Thanks, Alba. Hi, everyone. I'm Margareta Kern. I'm a visual artist based in the UK now, but I originally come from former Yugoslavia, from Bosnia. It's a bit of an echo. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. I can hear myself, which is scary. I want to introduce the speakers today, but before I do that, I just want to say also that I've been invited by Jana Graham and Alba to sort of think a bit more about a way in which we can bring activists, campaigners, artists, cultural workers in Nottingham and further. So think about a sort of local and UK context in connection to the former Yugoslav context. And I'm going to use the former Yugoslavia as a term that takes into account all the different parts of what was Yugoslavia. So I'm just going to use that term. And it all links to the exhibition upstairs that I hope you've seen. And I think it finishes Friday, which is tomorrow. So have a look. And it's called Monuments Should Not Be Trusted. And that exhibition is about the 70s and 80s art in Yugoslavia. Sorry, this is very kind of in one sentence. So tonight we're going to be talking about a specific, about a factory in Tuzla, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But we're also going to be talking about a sort of a local context of the history of workers' control in Nottingham. So first I'm going to introduce, first there's going to be Emina Busulagic, who is from Tuzla and who's a worker at Dita factory and who also led the strikes and the protests there, and she's the president of the union as well, right? And yeah. U centru. And also I'm going to introduce Damir Arsenijevic and Vanessa Jankovic, and I've missed on you. Vasic Janekovic, I don't know where that went. Who are very involved with the Tuzla factory, and also who have founded a workers' university. So they're going to talk about that. And I'm going to be kind of an intermediary and a translator and a chair. So the way we're going to do this is they're going to speak for about half an hour. And then we're going to have just a sort of time for a little bit of like a couple of questions. Then we're going to have Tony Simpson from Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation and Alan Tuckman from Worker Control, who are going to say a little bit about the local context. And then we're going to have lots of time to talk and ask questions. So, and I think we're finishing around 8:30. So that's kind of the program for the day. Okay, so I'll just hand over to Damir. Alba said. And I will introduce tomorrow at the end of today. So stay. Okay.
Dobar večer, ja sam Emina Busulagić, trenutno sam najstarija radnica fabrike deterđenata Edite. Inače sam bila u zadnjih 5 godina predsjednik štrajkačkog odbora radnika Edite.
Good evening, my name is Emina Busulagić and I'm at the moment the oldest worker at the Dita factory, and for the past 5 years I've been the president of the strike committee at the factory.
Moram da vam kažem da se borim za svoju Ditu, za radna mjesta, za sebe, a najviše za našu djecu.
And what I would like to tell you is that I'm fighting for my Dita, for jobs, for people who need to work, and most of all for our children.
Dita je rasla skupa sa mojom djecom. Kako sam gledala svoju djecu kako raste, tako i Ditu, i zato sam jako puno vezana za nju.
The Dita factory has grown together with my children. As my children grew, so did the factory. And this is why I'm very much closely linked to the factory.
Ta moja borba se počela još odmah poslije rata, kada su govorili o privatizaciji, kad su nam u toku rata, ono što je bilo svih nas, što je bilo društveno, što je pretvoreno u državno i to smo mi morali opet da kupimo od države, početak pljačke.
My struggle began immediately after the war. Or in fact, even during the war, in the year just before the war ended, 1994, when the authorities decided to nationalize what was socially owned. Before the war, all factories in the former Yugoslavia were socially owned. We had the concept of societal ownership. In 1994, Bosnian government decided to nationalize, in a sense, convert societal ownership into state ownership.
Moja borba sadrži, znači, u početku pregovore sa menadžmentom i vlasnikom firme, nastavkom štrajkovi upozorenja, štrajk prvi koji je krenuo 2011. Imamo proteste koji su bili 2012. i opsadu fabrike koja je počela 2013. u junu mjesecu do marta prošle godine.
So the struggle began with negotiations with the management and the owner of the factory. And as those failed, it continued into several strikes. The first one in 2011, then there was another one in 2012, 13, and one that began in June 2013 and lasted up until the beginning of 2014. Or was it in March? And then the occupation ended in March 2015.
Sve firme koje se nalaze u blizini moje fabrike su fizički uništene. To je bio klasična pljačka, borba za zemljom. Znači, građevinska mafija je u pitanju.
So as Dita is located in an industrial zone, there were other factories surrounding our factory, and all of those factories have been plundered. It was a classical case of asset stripping, in fact, taking material out of the factories as well as selling for scrap, with the aim to obtain property, land for property developers.
Nismo mogli spasiti fabriku od financijskog kraha, ali smo bili spremni i tu smo uradili, fabriku smo sačuvali od fizičkog uništenja.
And although we could not save the factory from bankruptcy, we managed to preserve the factory from sheer physical destruction.
Od početka naše borbe uvijek smo zahtijevali pokretanje rada i da hoćemo da radimo i da živimo od svog rada. To smo mogli samo ako svoju fabriku sačuvamo.
And from the outset, our struggle had been about working, about the right to actually work, to produce. And this is what we continue struggling for.
Prvi štrajk koji smo organizovali, još nismo imali nekog iskustva, to je nešto novo bilo. Bili smo u krugu fabrike, bili smo 7 mjeseci, niko nije čuo, niti je imao ko pravo da uđe, da vidi šta se dešava, jer menadžment i direktor nisu dali nikome da uđe da snime to.
And during the first strike, which for us was a very new experience because we were not used to striking, we were not even inside the factory itself, but we spent 7 months just in front of the factory, preventing entry to the management and security forces. And this was a situation in which very few people, in fact, knew for quite a while that we were on strike.
Drugi korak te naše borbe su bili naši protesti koji se od oktobra do kraja decembra 2012. godine i sad pitaju kakva je razlika između štrajka i protesta. Da bi se
The second step of our struggle were what we called protests, and they went on from October 2012 to the end of December 2012. And people often asked what is the difference between a protest and a strike.
U štrajk smo krenuli, znači, po zakonu o štrajku morali smo ispoštovati sve. Kada smo krenuli u proteste, mi nismo imali vremena da pripremimo za štrajk te sve odluke, ali bili smo primorani da krenemo u proteste jer menadžment je počeo da ruši našu fabriku. Tako da smo te proteste krenuli ispred fabrike, da smo blokirali fabriku. I taj je prvi put bilo da je uprava bila u krugu fabrike, a radnici su bili ispred fabrike, nisu nam dali da uđemo u fabriku.
So a strike had to be carefully prepared in accordance with the law. There is clear regulation as to the deadlines and so on and so forth. And when we entered into protests, we didn't have time to organize strike. And we entered into protests. We locked the management out of the factory.
Treći korak u našoj borbi i sačuvanje naše fabrike, znači počeo je još u junu 2013. godine kad smo iz fabrike istjerali upravu društva i da smo okupirali tu svoju fabriku.
Our third step actually started in June 2013 when we forced the management out of the factory and we occupied it.
Fabriku smo čuvali 24 sata. U fabrici nije bilo ni struje, ni vode, niti je bilo kanalizacije, ni telefona, nije bilo ništa.
So we had nothing in the factory and we had to keep 24-hour watch. We had neither phone connections, we didn't have electricity, water, nor any other utilities.
Treba da znate da nismo imali nikakve financijske pomoći ni primanja. Radnici DITE i danas dan nam duguju 47 mjeseci, znači 47 mjeseci nismo dobili platu, nismo imali uplata za penziono i nismo imali pravo na liječenje.
So the situation as now stands that the data factory workers are 47 monthly salaries in arrears, no national insurance contributions paid in for all those years, and no possibility for any sort of medical benefits.
Ono što nas je najviše boljelo i danas boli, što su državne institucije koje su bile dužne da zaštite radnika, to nisu radili. Od porezne uprave, od najvećih krivaca je svakako pravobranilaštvo, porezka uprava, inspekcije, vlada. Znači svim mogućim institucijama smo se obraćali, kako domaći, tako i stranim. Tako smo tražili pomoć i od njemačke ambasade, od engleske ambasade, od austrijske ambasade, najviše od austrijske ambasade zbog Hypo banke.
So actually our biggest grievance is that the state and any sort of state bodies failed to protect the workers, starting from the state prosecution, inland revenue, and the government. We also actually had to resort to seeking assistance from various embassies to protect the workers' rights. So we actually talked to the German embassy, we talked to the Austrian embassy, we talked to the British embassy, and largely we wanted to talk to the Austrian embassy because Hypo Alpe Adria Bank was mostly involved into giving these toxic loans to Dita.
Moram isto tako napomenuti da je jedan od koraka naše borbe bio i štrajk glađu. Moji radnici su znači vani u novembru mjesecu pred zgradom vlade Tuzlanskog kantona danima bili po kiši, po snijegu, štrajkovali su glađu.
So one other method of our struggle was hunger strike, and in November 2013 we had to resort to hunger strike in front of the regional, so-called cantonal government, in snow and in rain for days.
I još jedan korak koji smo uradili, da su radnici, ne samo DITE, znači još drugih firmi koji su pokradene pljačkaškom privatizacijom, mi smo se odlučili na jedan očajnički korak. Krenuli smo pješke prema hrvatskoj granici, 87 km, znači i to smo išli pješce, bez hrane, po kiši i po snijegu.
And another step that was involved in our struggle was 87 km long march to Croatian border, when Dita factory workers, together with other factory workers, organized this long march to protest against these corrupt privatization.
Jedan korak koji je krenuo i napredak naše borbe se desio u februaru 2014. kad su našu časnu borbu prepoznali i drugi građani kako Tuzlanskog kantona, tako i cijele Bosne i Hercegovine, kad su nam se pridružili, kad su hiljade nezadovoljni stali ispred zgrade vlade i bunt je proradio.
So thousands of dissatisfied and disenfranchised citizens, as you can see in these photos that are rolling now, in February 2014 stood up against the corrupt government, and they supported the DITA workers and other companies that were stripped of assets and supported these workers in protest.
Tad je proradio bunt gladnog i nezadovoljnog čovjeka i radnika.
So the hungry and the disenfranchised workers and citizens revolted.
Niko od aktuelne vlasti nije htio da izađe pred masu ljudi i da nešto obeća.
None of the authorities wanted to address these people, nor did they want to do anything to address the difficult position they were in.
Poslije ove paljevine i ovog bunta, jedna lijepa stvar što se desila, da je proradila ljudska solidarnost i humanost.
So this actually engaged human solidarity and our shared humanity in a way, because citizens from all areas of lives came together.
Pridružili su nam se akademska zajednica, studenti, đaci i u našoj borbi, nastavak naše borbe.
So in our struggle, the students, the lecturers, the unemployed, we all came together to continue the struggle against this corrupt privatization.
Zajedno smo postigli to da moja fabrika sada radi, da proizvodimo i da živimo od svog rada.
So what we managed to achieve jointly is that now my factory is operational, it's in production, and that we can live on our work.
Zaključak sve ove moje priče da niko neće drugi ništa uraditi za sebe, da se svi moramo boriti i ako se budemo borili da ćemo nešto izboriti.
So in conclusion, I would just briefly want to state that individually we cannot really do anything, only if we come together, as has been the experience of us in Tuzla. Only that way we can achieve something.
To je sve.
That's it.
Ajde, priđi.
Is this working? No.
Ne, ovaj.
No. Ja sam na Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, so because we don't have a great deal of time, we are going to try and somehow illustrate the flow of corruption and capital. We have been investigating the situation in DITA, trying to help DITA resolve the situation. But of course, DITA is actually a paradigmatic example of what has happened throughout the former Yugoslavia. In fact, it's happening all over the world. There are various echoes there of colonial practices. There are forms of very current capitalist predatory practices in place. And if you look at the first pair of words, one of the ways in which we are working with the DITA workers is through concepts of keywords. It was really important, for example, to start disentangling the various meanings of privatization. The reason we have corruption and privatization here is because the ideological imposition in the 80s and the early 90s was that inefficient public services are corrupt, and you're probably familiar with this, and privatization is the solution. Yeah? Then another problem was that, of course, with the war violence and later, there was a deep split imparted into this couple here, economic and political. That separation actually enabled further imposition of this. And, of course, ideologies cause various barriers between unconscious and conscious. So when we started uncovering various details of the privatization and corruption in Bosnia, we came across interesting routes of money. Do we actually have a
Sponge?
Yeah. Okay, because we'll actually need it later, sorry. And I'll need some space here. Okay, so we won't go into too many details, but for example, you've heard about Hypo Alpe Adria scandal, I suppose. Is everybody familiar with that? No? Okay, so I'll start with a little bit of something else. Everybody has heard of EBRD, yeah? European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, set up in 1991 after the end of the Cold War in order to assist former communist markets in their transition to properly open and free market. Yeah? And their mandate is to invest into infrastructures, which means public investment, and into private sector, which is not actually very well defined. The ratio is 40% into public investment and 60% private investment. Yeah? And this will become important. So, Hypo is something quite interesting. I'll try and give you a really, really brief lowdown. The late Austrian right-wing politician Jörg Haider, which I suppose most of you have heard of, was in an agreement. He entered into an agreement with Croatian president, who is also late now, Franjo Tudjman, about setting up a common bank in Croatia, which basically was financed by taxpayers' money in Corinthia. So an existing regional bank was converted into this Hypo Alpe Adria group, whose job before the official inauguration, which was in 1996, when it became Hypo Alpe Adria, up until then, during the war, it was laundering proceeds from arms trade, which was basically obviously part of the very necessary acts of arming Croatia, Bosnia, and so on, but also it was very nicely combined with big business. There was also quite a lot of drugs trade, which later became subject to various trials. Some of them are finishing just now. Yeah? So Hypo Alpe Adria became this really important player in the Balkans during the war and after the war in many privatizations. At the moment, some of the officials from the bank are on trial in Austria, Austrian citizens and some German citizens, because what they've basically done is issued hundreds of millions of toxic loans to various businessmen and investment projects in the Balkans, and obviously they all failed, and the Austrian government found itself holding a very hot potato. And for a long time, this is how the story was presented. What nobody actually bothered to point out is that European Bank for Reconstruction and Development owned 25% of Hypo Alpe Adria already in 1996. And this is really significant because EBRD is actually the hand, the financial hand of the European Union, which was dictating the reforms for Bosnia and Herzegovina. It was the most significant player in that. Again, I just want to point out that we are giving you here one of the branches of the processes, yes, because we don't have that much time. And when it comes to questions, you can ask more about various other sides of the story, yeah? So you see already that there is quite a deep structural involvement here, and there have been policies pushed on various governments. It wasn't just Bosnian government, it was also Croatian government and Serbian government, because Hypo was heavily involved with all of the war profiteers in Croatia, in Bosnia, and in Serbia. So when it comes to the privatization of DITA, we can go up to 2003 now. In 2003, DITA got first loans from Hypo Bank. And this is just a year before the privatization. This was a very small loan compared to the total. In 2004, Dita, which was at this point burdened by some, I think, 4 million euros in 2003, and this is the... It's so complex, I don't really want to bother you with too many details, but anyway, there was one layer of corruption that went on before the second privatization, in which the directors, the management of Dita, took out loans which were toxic. Yeah? When the new owner arrived, he burdened Dita with further 6 million straight away. And Dita is, in a sense, still suffering because of this burden, because of these loans. These loans were secured on the factory property. None of this money ever actually ended up being invested into production or any equipment, nothing. It all left Dita accounts. So the workers had absolutely nothing from this. And the production ceased more or less, kad je to bilo, recimo 2007. je prestala proizvodnja, konačno, ili 2008.
2008.
Yeah. So there was some production going on in this period, but Dita also had reserves, so there wasn't great need for investment. In 2008, all production ceased. And this is part of the reason why Minka was talking about protest as opposed to strike.
Dizali su kredite, mislim, i kad nismo radili, poslije toga su dizali kredite stalno.
So, in this period, they were continually reprogramming these loans. So, for example, if they took out 3 million in 2004, they were not paying, they were not servicing the debts, basically. So what they would then do, let's say a year or 2 years later, is take out another loan by adding, for example, to this 3 million, another 1.5 million. And it just continued and continued until 2015, by which point there were 16 million euros of burden on Dita, with no production, no investment, and no salaries having been paid for 47 months. So, how are we doing for time now?
Good. I think it's good if maybe wrap up and then Dana says.
Okay,
so we have enough.
A very brief outline.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to pick up from this and just looking at what Vanessa put on this blackboard, and we are going to be continuing this tomorrow, developing these keywords. Why is this important to us? I mean, it is important to us because we have to understand as a community in Tuzla what happened. It's a very painful process of reconstructing the history. Because what stayed after the war in Yugoslavia, what is the result of it? The result of it is millions displaced, hundreds and thousands of dead people, mass graves, people buried in unknown locations. And in Bosnia and Herzegovina you have 85 people owning $9 billion. We're talking about a country where unemployment ranges between 57 to 60%. The city of Tuzla, where I live and work, has unemployment of young people under 35 of 70%. So we are talking about social entropy that completely crumbles the way that people live with one another. It is such a state in which people usually say that even during the war it was better. So this is why it is important to try and build on any sort of struggle that manages to imagine and to materialize something different. So in this kind of very difficult kind of entropy, social entropy context, after the war, where wartime trauma continues, where this kind of class injury is very perceptible, where people are actually hungry and are reduced to basics. Exercising any sort of solidarity becomes very difficult because people resort into their private realm. On top of this, the violence of the war continues. And it continues in a very structured way through various state apparatuses, through these clientelist networks. So these 85 people, obviously, having all this capital, drive any sort of employment, drive any sort of access to public money, to public assets and everything, all the while trying to squeeze out as much as possible out of the current, still existing workforce. So internationally, Bosnia is presented as a black hole of Europe, as a failing state. All the while, Bosnia is in a de facto kind of international protectorate because following the peace agreement in Dayton, there were structures put in place in which the Peace Implementation Council drives certain decisions for the country. So, and all the while, with all this money being poured in for the reconstruction of Bosnia, the citizens of Bosnia don't have any sort of quality of life. It's just kind of getting worse and worse and worse. And where is the discrepancy? The discrepancy is in the balance sheet. Because you see that the war was actually fought for another elite to come to power and to be rich on the dead bodies of the people. So, in this kind of context, where helplessness prevails, where this kind of flight into the private realm kind of continues, and it is the only way out of it, because usually what you have is people saying, oh, we just cannot deal with this, let's just, I'm fending for myself and I'm just going to give a bribe to, for instance, get a job, or I'm just going to give a bribe for my mother who is dying of cancer to get some sort of a treatment. So this bribery continues the injury that started during the war in this kind of transition to capitalism. It actually, through bribery, these elites continue to get rich. And you end up in a seeming catch-22, that unless you give a bribe, you can't go anywhere. And this is why the protest, the DITA decision to step out of this helplessness and actually say no to this logic of bribes is all the more important, and for us as a community was important to uphold this principle around which we as the students and academics continue to support the workers, bringing them food, eating with them, keeping guard, trying to understand how we as a community come together around the question of even understanding how could this happen to us. And the question is, there is nothing particular about the breakup of Yugoslavia. We see that it's possible. I mean, we see it in Syria. It is possible. It is possible for the countries to be destroyed. It is possible for people to get displaced. So there is nothing special about it. But what is special is to understand the ways in which we were complicit, all of us in a way, were part of these decisions, and that we also are in a position to actually oppose this and try to instigate something different and something new. So when we, as activists, academics, students, came together around the workers, and our position was, coming from the academia as a lecturer, my position with my students was, well, this is the university. The university is not the building where we study. This is how we learn and how we actually, materialize something different. We slowly, for years, try to build up some sort of solidarity for us to understand and also see where we want to go as a community next. So, after the protest in 2014, there were around 10 to 15,000 people in the street, where this building is the DITA workers' building that was taken away from them by the government. And that building was the seat of the corrupt government. So you had actually a double injury there, that DITA workers who for decades paid for this building to be built was then taken away from them by the authorities for free, who were actually using it for free, and then DITA workers were forced to actually burn what belonged to them in order to oust this corrupt government. So after this, what we had was the community coming together in the form of an assembly that we called plenums. And we as a community, through direct democracy, thousands of us, try to understand not just what happened to us, but how we want to continue, because we had a lot of pressure from the police, a lot of pressure. The government was not there. So we had to build these kind of mechanisms of where, as a community, we want to go and how we want to move on. So we made several decisions that impacted on the production of DITA. DITA managed, as you heard Emina saying, managed to restart the production, and now we are helping as a community other factories to challenge these cases of corrupt privatization through which their companies were stripped of assets and they were left without jobs. So I'm just going to stop there. I think this is probably the time.
That's good.
And to kind of, because there is so much that's going on, to possibly open up this for questions. Yes?
Maybe, given that you started talking about... Should we just do this? Okay, so as we started talking about the Workers' University, if we just start a little bit of methodology here. This is a few reversals that we have introduced through all this work. Things that we have come to understand is that corruption equals privatization, that this needs to be joined up, and that there has to be free flow here. And this is just to start up the discussion.
Yeah. Maybe just a couple of models that we learned from this protest and from organizing the community into these assemblies is that because the courts are completely stuck and they're not operational, they're completely corrupt, the elites, the rich elites, have complete control over them. One of the things through the Workers' University that we set up is the Workers' Court. So we are now thinking about how do we seek justice in a public space, and how we actually claim justice. So this is one of the things that we are developing. And in order to do that, we have to, together as a community, reconstruct through either documents, evidence, through collecting testimonies, how this privatization, the corrupt privatization and the stripping of the assets of all these companies took place. So it's a big collective community effort to understand what happened to us and what kind of justice is going to be suitable for us as a community.
And maybe just to mention that the founding act of this workers' court was the occupation by the workers. This is a very important moment.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. So we want to just open up for like a couple of questions before we hear from Tony and Alan about the local context. So there's one question there and one question there. If you can just hold on for the mic.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you, it's a quick question, and this is just because I'm coming from an Eastern European country. I'm coming from Romania, and corruption is one of the issues that we have been dealing with. And it's also like part of the European Union discourse, especially after 2007 when we joined the European Union. Can you say a couple of words about the state of corruption before the war? Like in former Yugoslavia, I'm really interested to know how the state functioned before the war and whether corruption was an issue. Thank you.
Yes, corruption was an issue, but I mean this is quite a complex story. But maybe if I were to break it down really into this, when Societal ownership and worker self-management were introduced in Yugoslavia in the early 50s. One of the chief theorists, Boris Kidrić, warned of the danger of actually creating state capitalisms if the models that he proposed were not adhered to. And this is basically what happened, because the structures were never allowed to grow as horizontally as originally envisaged, which means the original idea was that through workers' self-management, workers would actually penetrate into all of the structures of political power, into all of the political structures, to be more precise. But this didn't really happen. And that opened the way for corruption of party officials. There were some factories in which self-management worked beautifully, and there were others which were really bad. There were very serious problems with political factories, which were not profitable, but they were there for certain reasons. So by the time we came to early 80s, and that means that we already had experience with the IMF impositions of structural adjustments. There was actually quite a bit of corruption, but nothing like what we encountered after the war. It's almost as if there was a great input, an expert of corruption, in fact, from top into this post-Yugoslav territory.
There was one question
there. Was a
there.
question over here. You could just wait for the mic.
Hi, I mean, there are so many questions really, but there's sort of three parts to it. Have you got your money back yet that you're owed? What does DITA produce? And what does nationalisation mean? That's sort of my question.
Ovako, novac nismo dobili nikakav, jer pravosuđe je zakazalo. Sve naše krivične prijave su godinama stojale u ladicama.
Okay, so we have not received anything back yet because the legislative structures in Bosnia failed to do their jobs. And so all the criminal charges we filed years ago were basically just sitting in somebody's drawers.
DITA proizvodi, ima dosta programa, praškasti program za pranje veša, tečni program za pranje veša, za suđe, industrijske deterđente, autoindustriju i kozmetiku.
DITA is a detergent factory, so what DITA produces would be washing powders for domestic use, industrial detergents, liquid detergents, and we used to also produce cosmetics.
Sad ću se pitati kako smo pokrenuli. Kad je DITA sad krenula prošle godine, bez jednog dinara, nismo imali uopšte novca, nego smo prodavali staro željezo, stari papir i plastiku. Od toga smo krenuli.
So when money whatsoever, so what we did, we sold some of the scrap metal we still had left and recycled paper and things like that in order to get enough money to buy some raw materials and restart the production.
Puno tog posla koji radimo, znači naši majstori sami popravljaju mašine, od 3 mašine napravimo 1 mašinu, prepravljamo sami dijelove, sami nosimo, sami čistimo, odrekli smo se jako mnogo i mi radimo sada za 160 eura.
So we have been improvising in any way we can. So our mechanics, they would make 1 machine out of 3, improvise spare parts, whichever way they can. We are doing all sorts of jobs ourselves, those of us who are still left there, and at the moment we earn something like 160 euros per month.
I još što najinteresantnije, nas je 74 sada, ali svi sve radimo. Nema da sam je posao inženjer, tehničar, fizički radnik. Ja radim u laboratoriji, kad imam posao u laboratoriji, kad nemam, ja idem dole na pakovanje, ja čistim, nosim i sve radim.
There are 74 of us left now, and we basically all jump in and do whatever is needed. I'm a lab technician, but if I don't have any work in the laboratory at a particular moment, I will go down and pack or carry things or clean, and everybody does the same.
Thank you.
You also wanted to know what nationalization is,
Yes.
yeah?
I mean, what did it mean in that context?
Okay. Well, basically, it means that the state appropriates property. So something that was owned societally. And what that means is that, it's a model under which everything is publicly owned, in a sense. It's slightly more complex than that, but this is a form of societal ownership. So in 1994, the state basically abolished societal ownership and declared itself the owner of what was previously social, what was common. And this is what Minka was describing as nationalization.
Difficult, really, when you think about the terms and what
Yes.
they mean. It's all shifting, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have time for more questions after we hear from Tony and Alan. Just briefly about the local context and the workers' movements locally. So, do you want to come up here or? You just stay. We'll get chairs. No, stay.
Zato što ova dvojica će sad pričati o šta je lokalna situacija.
Do you want to sit together or?
I don't know, do we need...
Ragazzi, idemo samo na kompjuter moj to, daj.
Take that one and I'll get it.
A to je moj telefon, samo da ga...
Primary, is it the old one?
Yeah.
I'm a bit shocked by what we've seen. I'm not familiar very much with the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we had a session earlier this afternoon when we met Minka and colleagues, and she took us through the experience of trying to keep livelihoods going in the detergent plant, and she explained how it wasn't just where you went to work, it was the institution which had helped or paid or had been the means for educating your children. And her own children had been through the school associated with the plant. So that the pilfering and theft of the enterprise actually was a theft of an education system and a health system and a pension system and all the means of social support. And the thought that came to my mind, I've been pondering this word unbribable, which strikes me as not one that you hear very often. I think we can thank Dimar for Unbribable and his book, Unbribable Bosnia and Herzegovina, The Fight for the Commons, which is available online. But the thought that it gave rise to in my head was larceny. And I have a little project which is called Academies of Larceny. And this is to do with the privatisation of the school system in England. And I've been collecting the accounts you receive of how the academies, which were formerly schools, have, in some instances, been reported to the Department of Education because the people that now control them have been pilfering money from these schools. And it's quite shocking. I mean, the startling case is of an academy in Lincoln where the principal, who was no end of a good academy principal, bought a farm in France for the school, apparently. But his wife liked to go there on holidays with her friends. There was another instance closer to home where I think it was his son was having riding lessons somewhere in the Trent Valley, and these were charged to the academy as well. And these are the ones that came out in the Department of Education report. And no doubt there are other instances of such larceny which are not caught and go unremarked. But the reason I labour this point a bit is because I think it's an indication of what happens when you break down the common good and put it into the gift of people who think that they have a prior interest. It's temptation, to tell you the truth. And if they were private companies, they would be audited rather more rigorously. I think some of them are finding out that now, actually, that the auditors are beginning to look very closely. So I rather favour this idea of keywords. Raymond Williams is the person that we associate with keywords. He wrote the famous book in the 80s. It's been stolen by Rupert Murdoch. I think it's published by whatever his publishing company is called now. Not published very well, very poor quality. But the way to try and link this to the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation is beyond me. I mean, I must say it's not obvious. Except that when we hear people talking about after the war, well, if you say that in this country, usually you're talking about after the Second World War. But our visitors tonight are talking about the Bosnian wars from 1992 to 95 or thereabouts, I think. Quite recent. And this happened in Europe on our watch, very close to home. And what we heard about the banks and the people who were making money out of those wars and how that was done, well, doesn't that ring true? I mean, haven't we all discovered since 2008 what our banks are like? I mean, the story goes deeper than that. So there is partly an agenda here, I think, for a European peace movement worth the name, that it should actually address these kinds of issues. There's also an Institute for Workers' Control echo here. The IWC was a Nottingham creation. Ken Coates, my colleague who died in 2010, he was one of those that helped give birth to the Institute for Workers' Control, along with Tony Topham and Michael Barrett-Brown and others. And I was looking at Ken's book, which is called Work-ins, Sit-ins and Industrial Democracy, which came out in the early 80s. And he was describing how there was an occupation at the General Electric Company in Liverpool, GEC. It was a proposed occupation in 1969 because they were faced with closure. And they wanted advice about how to keep the plant going. And they asked the Institute for Workers' Control if they could help. And people went back and forth to Liverpool. And to keep it short, the outcome was actually it wasn't possible to viably work in at that plant and keep it going in that way. It was much better to sit in and look for solidarity from others, other enterprises, to make the industrial point. But a lesson was learnt in Liverpool in 1969. And one of the points that Minka made about if you occupy your factory, you can't get the journalists in because the gates are locked. That was also the experience that they had at Liverpool, I believe. So 2 years later, in 1971, there'd been a change of government. Tony Benn had been Minister of Technology when the GEC occupation took place in '69 and went to see the plant. He was out of office by '71, but that was when Upper Clyde Shipbuilders had their big work-in under Jimmy Reed and others, and it was hugely successful. I mean, it was an inspiring campaign. And they'd learnt the lesson from '69. Trade unions learn by example, writes Ken in Work-ins and Sit-ins, and there's something to be said for that. Well, if we compare those years to the images we've been looking at for the last hour or so, and we see the confrontation on the streets of Tuzla, if we compare the images of the occupation of the Upper Clyde shipbuilders when everybody was walking down the street arm in arm, I think it's an indication of the way the world has changed in those 30 to 40 years. So I'm still wondering about this. I haven't got a neat way to end. I mean, I'm following a train of thought, and I look forward to continuing it tomorrow. Thank you.
Is that on? Yeah. I'll pick it up where Tony left off, because the Institute for Workers' Control is a good place to start. There is a difference between the pictures. If you have seen the picture of UCS and them all marching down the street, they're actually all men. You don't notice any women in that. But the thing changed, and actually in the 1970s into the 1980s, there was a wave of factory occupations, very similar to the Tuzla experience, people fighting for their jobs against the onslaught of closures, fighting for the right to work. Like a lot of things to do with trade unions, those began to fade away in the 1980s and more or less disappeared. But actually about, 7 or 8 years ago, things seem to be changing. I mean, not only was there the rise of the Occupy movement, but that seemed to be filtering into industry as well. I mean, a number of factories were occupied in the UK. I don't know if people remember Vestas or Visteon, a factory on the Isle of Wight producing turbines for electricity generation. And alternative energy. And actually, a lot of agendas like that came out of the 70s movement. Around that time, a number of people were beginning to see a resurgence. And certainly there was an interest beginning to re-emerge in workers' control. A number of people not only seeing these movements in the UK, but even in the United States, there was an occupation at Republican Windows and Doors in the middle of Chicago. Much more significant in one sense, but not really getting much publicity in the UK, was that in Latin America and particularly in Argentina, people were taking over factories as a result of the economic crash that had occurred there. So we had the phenomenon of recuperated factories. The workers, probably after the management disappearing, the factory being closed, and the workers owed, exactly the same way as in DETA, weeks, if not months, or even years of salary, decide essentially initially to hold the factory as hostage against wages. They wanted their wages. And eventually some of these began to produce again, and not just factories. In fact, there's now a well-known hotel in Argentina, a meeting place for trade unionists, activists, that's taken over by the workers. And some of these are long-running. A whole number of people began to get together as well with an interest in these occupations, or the rise of the workers' movement generally, or even popular movements, because a new democratic phenomenon, again, which has been highlighted in the case of Tuzla, popular assemblies of one form or another were appearing out of these movements. People talk about, or were talking about them as sort of horizontalism, just popular assemblies. And people started talking about that. And one of the initial things was to bring together a book, and the first one since Coates and Topham, I think, collected a book on workers' control by Dario Azzeni and Emmanuel Ness on workers' control. The recent experience, and quite a lot of attempting to bring past experiences, back to, I suppose, the 1920s, Italy and so on, into France and America in the 30s, and so the experiences of workers' control, and the UK experience for that matter. There is a very local connection to this, which was that one of the authors, Dario Azzeni, very early on in the opening of the Nottingham Contemporary, gave a talk here. He is also a film producer and had produced a film about the recuperated factories in Argentina, and it was shown here, and he talked about it. We met up, and one of the things we decided that we ought to do is develop the connections through a website. And what became developed was a website called workerscontrol.net. And what we've tried to do is bring together the experiences of occupations across the world, use the net for that. And we've drawn together the experiences and tried to open a dialogue and a communication between groups of workers and others in those sorts of activities. At the moment, there are occupations. I was talking earlier. Viomi in Greece, in Thessalonica, seems to be very similar, and I gather that DITA has communication with them. Next weekend, there is a meeting in an occupied railway yard in the middle of Rome to discuss the development of cooperatives and the common. So, hopefully there is a broader dialogue and an opportunity. We'll see each other. That opens up a dialogue and a communication between people. And actually, one of the advantages now is that we know about these, or we can hopefully know about those experiences and develop them. And develop some sort of radical alternative. I'll leave it there. Okay.
Thank you. Is this mic on? Maybe it takes some time. Thank you so much. We can open the floor for questions now. Sorry, what was that? Minka, hoće nešto kažu?
Da nešto nacrtam.
Okay, sorry. Minka wants to draw something. Hoćete mikro?
Neću to, da njemu.
If somebody asked me if I was satisfied, I would say that I'm completely dissatisfied.
Moja firma riješena, ali jako puno firmi koji su neriješene i radnika ima 530.000 na birozu za zapošljavanje.
So, for instance, the Bosnia and Herzegovina has around 3.7 million people, and over 500,000 people are unemployed. So, why am I dissatisfied? Because my factory may have started producing, but other factories are completely destroyed. So I just want to draw the situation in Bosnia as I see it. So these are the workers. So these are the workers. So we have 3 members of the presidency. We have the assemblies, various sorts of levels of government, state prosecution, all these state-level institutions hold these workers within a camp. And these are some workers from the outside and on the outside that managed to break through. Now we have another layer of the barbed wire. These are the political parties, regardless of whether they are left-wing or right-wing. They all work together in unison. So this is the second circle that's keeping these people tightly in. And these workers in between are the workers who are loyal to political parties. The third ring that we have, it's the EU, IMF, the World Bank, and all sorts of, like, you know, Russia, the United States. And now we have God, the law, and the sun. But it can't reach these people. Because these people have taken on being gods and being the head of and the source of every law, and that the sun actually rises only for them.
Great. Thank you. Hvala. Super. Okay.
Good evening, dobar večer. I just wanted to ask, in the light of looking at all these pictures, the police seem to be in a lot of them, and I was wondering how the situation is now with the occupation, and how do the police respond to that, and how do you respond to them?
Right.
Sad ću vam ovako reći, jedini gdje se ko zapošljava to je u policiji.
Okay, so basically the only jobs going around are police jobs.
Prošle godine oko 10 miliona maraka su dali za gumene metke i za opremu za specijalce.
And last year the police paid about 10 million convertible marks, which is Bosnian currency, that's 5 million euros, for rubber bullets and other equipment for the police.
Da su taj novac uložili u privredu, u fabrike da se pokrenu, to im ništa ne bi trebalo.
And yeah, they wouldn't really have needed this equipment and those rubber bullets if they had invested this money into production, into restarting factories.
Actually, I'd like to add that we have the resurgence of the police state. That we actually, what we witnessed here is that the police were completely unprepared. Unfortunately, these were the local police officers. So, you know, you would have a situation where mothers and sisters would be on the other side of the protesters, just confronting their sons and husbands, saying, "What on earth do you think you're doing? Just drop that shield." And police actually, they withdrew. They completely withdrew. And I witnessed the police officers completely collapsing in tears because they were ordered to stand against their own people. And after such brutality of the war, after we survived, who has the right to beat us? Who has the right to unleash the dogs onto our teenagers and our children who are in the street? Well, it's a tried and tested scenario, but that's what enraged people in Tuzla on the 6th of February, because we had de facto the repetition of the war.
Yeah.
Before the 7th of February, when the building was burned down, it was that the police were involved in the street fight, and the community said, "This is not happening. We are not having another war here, and we are defending our city and ourselves." So the troubling thing is that the British government, for instance, is providing money for the rubber bullets. So it's the British taxpayers' money that's actually buying the rubber bullets for the Bosnian police. And these rubber bullets are going to be used against us.
Yeah.
So this is the flow of this capital. This is how power is kept together internationally. It is that you are paying for the rubber bullet that's going to be fired into me tomorrow. And they're being trained, because Britain has developed very sophisticated mechanisms of crowd control, and Britain is exporting knowledge about police control internationally, and we most visibly, we most kind of palpably see it in Bosnia.
I'll just abuse my situation here with the mic and to exactly add this, which is that the after the plenums, after the assemblies, some months later there were elections, and the British sent a special force to make sure that the elections went peacefully. And they were called dragoons. Has anyone heard of them? So I just wanted to add that. Okay, I'll stop.
As I understand it, that Britain won a concession from the EU to be exempted from the social chapter, and the deal was, as I understand it, with the Germans to allow Croatia to become recognised within the European Union. At the same time, my understanding is that the Foreign Secretary, a bloke called Hurd, apparently known at school as Hitler Hurd, was involved with the big British bank, I think Barclays, and they were intimately involved in what was happening in Croatia. So maybe I've forgotten the name of the little organisation. That might be a Hippo, maybe a Barclays enterprise, I wonder. But in terms of the assemblies, how do you make those autonomous and free from Barclays Bank, but also free from the political establishment, yes, maybe, and so that they have an authentic democratic basis?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think we should add Barclays there onto our map, and if you're here tomorrow,
and not just Barclays.
Yeah, but it would be. It's a really welcome contribution, and as I was explaining to, sorry, I didn't catch your name. Maggie, as I was explaining to Maggie, this is how we are connected. We are connected through this capital, through these bullets, but also through our coming together tonight to figure out. I mean, this is a sort of a plenum in which we try to figure out where we are situated in this network and how we are complicit in it, unconsciously perhaps, and how we kind of contribute to it, but also how we can get out of it completely rather than just being in the oppositional thing to fight it, but how do we create something autonomously? This was the idea, to rescue politics, to say that politics is not only corrupt party politics, that politics is these people who are actually out there who want just basic things. I mean, they want good education, they want to be able to be seen by their GP without having to give half of their monthly salary, who want to be able to afford the basics, maybe, a holiday. It's just really, the people's desires are not that huge when it comes to, what it is that they want. But when you have the system, the political system that's equated with this nepotistic, clientelist network of political parties, once people start, and it's a very painful thing. I mean, possibly one of the largest lessons is that people really don't want to do politics unless they really have to. I mean, this arose out of necessity. Majority of people want to get on with their lives, and this is why it's very difficult to ensure the political mobilization of people and their involvement. First of all, people are scared. Because the pressure by these political parties is very subtle, yeah, and they threaten your families in a very, very subtle ways. They send the police. I mean, for instance, we had police come to our, departments, factories, just to do these informative talks. These are the ways that pressure is kept on people to give up. I mean, it's a try and tested period. So how do we ensure the operation of the plenums? Well, it's very difficult. It's so difficult. I mean, on the one level, logistically, you have to organize the table, the mic, somewhere where people are going to sit. What is the agenda? You know, what it is out of 700,000 questions that we want to deal with. What is the priority? And how we keep focus on the most important questions and how we get people involved and for them to see their own position. So it's very difficult. That's a short answer, but it is possible. And the only way that we kept the plenums going on is with the threat of the protest, that we say that we are this group of people, we are the community who are actually involved and interested in our welfare and what is our commons. Because we reach the level below which we cannot go, and this is why bribability is a concept of, even the etymology of briberies comes from Old French, from bribe, which means crumb. So we do not want to settle for crumbs. But, it's not about one more crumb. It's about, this kind of qualitative shift of what kind of life we want to have, and we can have, because Bosnia is a rich country. Bosnia has 3.7 million people. I mean, it's a city with all the resources. It's just the way it's being put into this ringer through which you bleed people out of all sorts of capital and, emotionally exhaust them to give up. Is how we fight this, and this is why we had the level of conscious unconscious, which is another level of how we kind of even unconsciously give up in the political struggle. So I hope this answered the question.
I just wanted to continue in a sense answering your question about the logistics, the difficulty. I mean, Dan has spoken in general, but I think it would be worth tracking back a little bit to say what contributed. I mean, he started talking about this confrontation, which we would recognise in this country most potently in the miners' strike in 1984-85, of families split either side of police lines, where you saw your own brother-in-law, your own son, your own uncle on the other side of the police line, and you were with the striking miners. And what happened on that day, of the day of the burning of the building of the Sodaso factory, turned cantonal government headquarters, was, I think I'm right in saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that no policeman was injured.
No, nobody was.
Nobody was injured. The building was burnt, but nobody was injured. One police car was burnt, symbolically, turned over and burnt. But it was an event that could have run. I mean, people could have been killed, seriously injured, etc., etc. The whole action was an action about the pent-up life blood and life energy of that town. And actually what the tipping point that tipped the protests into the plenums was actually that the students and the academics, I mean, later on it included war veterans, it included pensioners, etc., etc., produced a manifesto, not as tablets of stone, like this is how we're going to proceed on the basis of this manifesto, but as a sort of statement of the state of play. This is where things stand. This is what we're faced with. This is what we could do. This could be a starting point. And that manifesto became the kind of, just like a discussion document for the first plenum, the first 2 or 3 plenums. It went up on trees all around here. There were copies of it posted on the trees for people just to come and have a look. And people could either agree or disagree with the manifesto. They could come along and say, I don't think that sentence is right. We should say something different. The manifesto changed and developed over time. But it was like a statement of the state of play. And that was a critical point, because at that point the protests were very much located around DITA as a specific and the way that the occupation was panning out, and the inability to make the strike gain any ground, whereas it needed to bring together this energy of the city in a way that could be expressed more fully.
Yeah. There's a question over there.
Yeah, again, this is a quick question. I'm curious about the economic model of the factory. I mean, the economic model of the factory. I mean, how you organize your supplies, how you distribute the products, and especially how sympathetic the suppliers, for example, or the people you sell the products to are towards your struggle.
Mi smo sada u stečaju i nema direktora, ima samo stečajni upravnik i imamo jednog ekonomistu što radi s njim. A što se tiče proizvodnje,
So the factory is now in receivership. So at the moment we have a receiver, a sort of a director, and we have an economist working with him. Economist, this is a bit like a finance person.
a što se tiče proizvodnje, to radnici sami odlučuju šta ćemo proizvoditi, koliko i nabavljamo sirovine i prodajemo mi.
And as far as production is concerned, this is we workers, we decide on our own what we are going to produce, how much we negotiate with the suppliers.
Kad nabavljamo sirovinu, moramo avansirati 15 dana prije nabavke te sirovine.
And when we are ordering raw materials, we have to pay 2 weeks in advance.
Kad prodajemo gotov proizvod, od 35 do 60 dana čekamo naplatu tog proizvoda. To nam je najveći problem.
But when we sell our products, we have to wait to be paid approximately from between 30 to 60 days.
Imamo jednu pomoć od dvije trgovačke kuće koje su jake, koje avansiraju i traže svoju trgovačku marku. Znači oni unaprijed uplate i mi proizvedemo.
But the assistance that we are receiving at the moment is from 2 retail chains who basically are in a sense giving us a fee in advance so that we can order the raw materials, produce and then deliver the products to them.
Moja fabrika vrlo često stoji da bi čekali naplatu prodaje gotovog proizvoda.
So the production is actually not continuous at the moment. We have these cycles where we are basically waiting for the money to land into the account so we can order more raw materials and continue.
Mislim, kad ne radi fabrika, mi tada čistimo, popravljamo remont i dočerujemo ono što ne može dok fabrika radi.
So when the actually production is not going on, we are cleaning up the factory, we are trying to tidy up things, and because the factory is in a very bad state, we are trying to fix up as many things as possible.
Što još?
Well, actually I can add, I mean, as a community we come together around these kind of old socialist time work actions. So as a community we, for instance, go to DITA and ever since 2012 we've been present at DITA, in front of DITA, with the occupation during the production. So there are campaigns that are devised for people to buy the DITA products, like washing up liquid. And this happens, for instance, it's really interesting, like big detergent companies like Ariel, Henkel and all, they drop their prices at 40% so that they actually completely destroy DITA products, but people still, out of pride, try to buy the washing up liquid, the eponymous 3 days. So it's a really a struggle against this kind of competition. So, for instance, the people would go and help DITA workers pack their products and just have a sandwich together and just it's a way of contributing, and that's also the way to organize supplies through various connections. We are trying to help and facilitate, because big companies also try to stall the time that's needed for the raw materials to be brought in. So, for instance, we contact the embassies and try to kind of use all sorts of connections that we have internationally to say, well, if you're getting supplies for DITA from Germany, so that it doesn't take 4 weeks. It doesn't need to take 4 weeks. It can take a week, and we speed things up so that the production can go on. And or if certain machinery for instance, that needs to be serviced in Germany, is done so that they come into, for instance, it's very expensive, but we try to facilitate that through some networks. So.
Samo da napomenem još, početkom rada DITE u cijeloj državi je sprovedena akcija kupujmo domaće, kupujmo kvalitetno.
Yeah, so when the production started in DITA, there was the whole campaign of buy the local product, buy good quality product.
Čitavo vrijeme što sam govorila da je naše domaće daleko kvalitetnije.
So, and I kept saying that our local products, locally produced, are of good quality, proved to be right.
Ja lično sam u svojoj fabrici uvijek apelirala najbolji kvalitet jer neću da varam svog čovjeka.
So I pushed, when I developed these products, I pushed for the top quality because I don't want to steal away from my own people in the community by selling them bad quality products.
Od nekih trgovačkih kuća dobila sam informaciju da je prodaja uvoznih deterđenata opala za 3 puta.
So from big chains, supermarkets, I got some estimates that foreign detergent, so-called foreign detergent sales dropped by 3 times.
Druge neke firme, nisu deterđentske, domaće firme su me nazvale posle 3-4 mjeseca i rekli da je njihova prodaja za 30% skočila samom tom akcijom.
Other companies, local companies rang me up within 3 or 4 months of this action that we started, let's buy local products, to tell me that their own products, sales of their own products shot up by 30 or 40%. So, these other companies also benefited.
Hi. Just to come back to a much earlier point the gentleman raised about Douglas Hurd and Andromeda. It's very important because it's a solemn responsibility people in the UK carry and don't know about. Many of them don't. 1992, it was the Maastricht Conference where John Major sold Yugoslavia for exclusion from the euro. He did a deal with Helmut Kohl. Our exclusion, British money, led directly to the war, agreeing to the independence of Croatia. It wasn't that Croatia should not be independent. It was the manner and timing that was stupid and wrong, and the alliances that were built around it. That created also the axis of Germany, Austria, Croatia, Slovenia, Hypo Adria, Raiffeisen, and all of the big, that became very corrupt financial concerns were developed from that John Major's great achievement. And then he went on to even more stupid, because then having thought, my God, I've just given the Germans and their historical desire for the warm sea, I've just given them an advantage now, so I'm going to swing a bit in Belgrade direction. Terrible, terrible error, just as much an error. It's the first one. And so it went on. 1995, Douglas Hurd went with Dame Pauline Neville-Jones, who had been head of the Adriatic desk at the Foreign Office, later then to be chief chair of the BBC. Dame Pauline Neville-Jones, Douglas Hurd, went to Belgrade weeks after Srebrenica, for which Slobodan Milosevic was responsible, with his lackeys Ratko Mladic and other criminals. Weeks after that, to negotiate the privatization of Serbian Telecom for the National Westminster Bank, by the way, was the actual bank. But we carry profound responsibilities. We meddled in Britain appalling, and we're still doing it. These guys in the British Embassy who were supposed to be trying to help us with the citizens' movement, the same embassy that was in favor of democratic movements in Bosnia, has been training the police to stop us when we start again. And therefore creating another disaster. So we really need to get Britain, people, citizens of the UK, have responsibilities we have to face up to. And I wish it would be able to rely on people like in this room, maybe, that we start redressing some of these things. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions or thoughts or even just
I'd like to say
reflections?
something.
Oh, I was wondering where the voice came from.
A little voice.
A little voice. Just want to give one second.
Anybody else wants to ask anything before I...
Well,
I'd just like to follow on a little from the last contribution, and I'd like to know what our visitors have to say about it. Certainly the role of Britain, of NATO, of the EU in the former Yugoslavia was certainly ignominious, there's no doubt about that. But I do not think it was a wicked plot of the former Yugoslavia. It was well underway before then. I mean, for example, in the mid-80s, there were stirrings of Serbian nationalism. Members of the former Marxist humanist group, Praxis, produced a virulent Serbian nationalist manifesto claiming the Serbs were being oppressed by the other nationalities. And it was a lot of rubbish. But I think the main contradictions that gave rise to the tragedy of Yugoslavia were internal. Sure, outside forces meddled to their own advantage, but I think we have to face up to the fact that it wasn't all a wicked imperialist plot by the IMF and so on. What do you think?
Yes, I think it would be very difficult to disagree with that. However, I think one of the things I always had a problem with when it comes to the narratives and discourses around the breakup of Yugoslavia is that there has always been far too much emphasis on the ethnic, for example. And it's interesting because it has caused a lot of... I mean, this doesn't concern only the Western discourses, it concerns our own discourses as well, you know. I was just talking to some people in Zagreb the other day, the left there, and they were telling me how finally the civic society organizations have started not just working, but recognizing that workers' struggle is their struggle too. That you cannot separate struggles against racism, struggles for LGBT rights, struggles for workers' control from anti-fascism or human rights struggles. They're inseparable. But it's interesting that you pointed out these things because these have been precisely our problems. And perhaps I'll go back to the 80s. You're right, yes. It wasn't actually Praxis, one of the Praxis members, but a lot of the Serbian academics and the Serbian Orthodox Church have sat down very early on in the 80s, looked at the maps and started drawing new borders. Very similar thing happened in Croatia. These sort of things had been going on ever since the World War II. And perhaps we can say that, you know, the political economy of the crimes of the World War II continued elsewhere, all throughout the post-war period. When I say post-war, in this case, I'm talking about post-World War II. The Ustaša emigration in Argentina, in Australia, in Canada, they continued publishing calls for great Croatia. Serbian immigration did the same. These people worked, they all did. They worked very diligently. And they had the collaboration of the Catholic Church. The other ones had the collaboration of the Serbian Orthodox Church. You know, it's true. And one of the things we concluded recently is that, or that we started talking about a lot more recently, is that, you know, Yugoslav state, let's say, Yugoslav leadership, actually made a really cardinal mistake by not helping religious communities reform themselves, by not actually being more open, by neglecting this spiritual aspect, which in the end got linked to the ethnic, you know. So it's a complex issue, and I don't want to bore you all, but there are all these things to be considered. Ultimately, however, it was an economic conflict. And that's really important to understand. You know? This was it was a set of former colonies. We haven't even been through a proper decolonizing process. We are completely repressing all of that. it is and it was about money. And this is what Kidrish was warning about. When he was talking about state capitalisms in 1952, he was talking about ethnic state capitalisms. And this is what happened in the end. And this is what broke the country apart. And it was supported, of course. People saw profit in it, and they profited from it.
Thank you. Did you want to say something from before then?
Yeah.
Just hold the mic.
Very quickly, I just wanted to say that actually I really, felt that when Damir said this is a plenum of sorts as well, and it's true. And the thing is, we are all in the same boat actually. And I'm talking not just about Britain and Bosnia, I'm talking about everywhere, I'm talking about Papua New Guinea, I'm talking about Canada, I'm talking about the US. Look at poor America at the moment, It's terrible what's going on. A friend of mine moved over 3 years ago, and he was despairing over Orban's rise in Hungary. And he said to me, I'm so happy I'm moving to the States because Europe is becoming fascist. I was looking at him and I thought, are you crazy? That's fascism, what you have over there. Are you not seeing this? So what I'm trying to say is this. We really have to start working together and connecting everywhere, creating parallel structures of support, solidarity, organizing, and pushing for what we need.
Yeah, I'm just going to continue in this, and in December 2000, last year, December, just like a couple of months ago, we had some people from Geneva, our friends, giving us calls from the UN, saying all the indicators are flashing red for conflict prevention in Bosnia. So Bosnia is not anymore in this kind of recovery. It is in a conflict, on the verge of conflict again. One of the continuation of the structural reforms for Bosnia is going to be the complete and utter privatization of natural resources, water in particular. And it's going to be the Argentinian scenario of the 80s. So this is the way that the IMF and the World Bank is going to be helping. So what we are now trying to regroup ourselves and fight against this privatization, where we won't even have access to our natural resources, is to try and figure out how to go about that. And as you rightly pointed out, after this scenario, Argentinians reclaimed their water companies, and when people started dying, and we had huge floods in 2014, which proved a quarter of the country was covered with water. So, but we had these catastrophes, the ecological catastrophes, are going to be increasing on the way. We see our experience of the Bosnian War shows us that fascism travels. How does it travel? Our comrades, our friends in Greece at Thessaloniki, right? They are, and in Athens, they are under the threat of Golden Dawn. Golden Dawn was part of the forces that slaughtered people in Srebrenica in 1995. So, the same people who slaughtered Bosnians are now actually killing the immigrants, killing the Greek people, and there is a continuation of this fascist violence throughout, and it's on the rise. The onus is on us, how we regroup to not just oppose that only, but to create some sort of alternative that this doesn't happen on a mass scale.
Thank you. So I'm just doing a quick time check. I think there is time for one last comment or a question or reflection. And I didn't want to just go from what Dami, you said, into closing notes. I just felt like I wanted to hold that moment for just a bit longer in the room, because it's a bit like, it's a call for action, and I feel like I don't want to close it down. So
maybe to invite people to come tomorrow to continue this.
Okay, I'll do that. So we're going to continue tomorrow. So we're not going away, not even after tomorrow. So tomorrow's event starts at 1:00, goes on till 6, and there's going to be a whole range of speakers joining us. Tomorrow's event is looking at kind of the relationship of workers' movements together with cultural workers and different forms of solidarities that are formed. So we're going to have groups like Justice for Domestic Workers. We're going to have an implicated theatre group that works with migrant workers. We're going to have Precarious Workers Brigade. We're going to have also, as a beginning, we're going to have our friends who are also here from a group called Block in Zagreb, who are going to give a historical but also contemporary context for the student centres that were operational in the 70s and 80s in Yugoslavia. And we're going to be also joined by Gillian Wild who's going to be talking about more kind of the histories of sort of kind of based more around Midlands. So it's going to be quite a lot of different voices. So we start more historical and then we move more to the present moment, looking at like building solidarities and building bridges, and also looking at kind of future actions and ways that we can work together. I think that's really kind of important. So like the sort of latter part of the afternoon will be focused on that. Yes, we're also going to have some students who have occupied Goldsmiths and also Cass. So, great. So it's great. I think it's going to be amazing, interesting. I'm already emotional. My brain's already going. I'm already exploding. I also mustn't forget to say that there are some cards here, and I don't know if you want to say a little bit about the cards. Sorry?
You say about the cards.
I'll say it all. So these cards are produced, they're from Tuzla, from the Workers' University, with very similar images like this, but saying greetings from Tuzla. And if you would like to take a card or a few cards, there's 3 different designs, 3 different images, and whatever you can donate will go to the fund that the Dita factory, because they need to buy a forklift truck. So it will go, it's very specific, it will go directly towards that. So whatever you can spare, that would be great. And there's a little, is there going to be a little bucket? We're self-organising a bucket very quickly. Okay, so also I want to just say one more thing, which is there is a banner behind you, and this banner was made collectively by myself and a group of friends, comrades, allies, during the uprising in Bosnia 2 years ago. And also we started and ran a blog that we tried to translate as much as was coming from Bosnia, especially translate all the plenum demands. So we tried to sort of get as much out there in English as possible, and you can still access it at BH Protest File, I think .wordpress. But if you Google BH Protest Files, you'll find it. And I believe there's also sort of a small video clips from the actual assemblies, from plenums, that gives you a kind of sense of how it was organised and how, because they were actually live streamed. So I remember watching them live stream and wishing I was there. So I think I've covered everything for now. Am I forgetting anything for tomorrow? So yeah, please join us if you can. It would be really great to continue and to keep this momentum. Join us for drinks. I think we're going to a pub. The good old British way of continuing revolution. I'll see you in the pub. Thank you so much, all of you. It's been really inspirational, moving. Thank you.
It's brilliant. Yeah, we've been thinking we should, sort of try send you some stuff.
Yeah, well, I was asking about that.
I think I could actually speak.